Sloane stormed the probate court, screaming that I was a leech and nothing more than paid help. Her attorney sneered, telling the judge I could not be trusted with $5. Never mind $8 million. The judge turned to me, expecting an objection to the insults. I did not even stand. I just glanced at my watch and kept my voice low. Not yet, Your Honor. I am waiting for the gatekeeper. My name is Lily Woods, and for the last 10 minutes, I had been sitting in a rigid wooden chair while my sister tried to bury me alive. The air in the probate courtroom was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and old anxiety, but the noise coming from the plaintiff's table was fresh and piercing. Sloane did not just speak. She performed. She stood in the center of the aisle, her designer black dress perfectly tailored to suggest mourning. Though I knew for a fact she had bought it 3 days ago specifically for this appearance. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her voice trembling with a vibrato that would have been impressive if it were not entirely manufactured. She called me a leech. She called me paid help. She looked up at the judge, eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and insisted that I had manipulated our grandfather, that I had twisted his mind in his final days to lock his own flesh and blood out of his estate. I sat perfectly still. I did not shift my weight. I did not sigh. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my thumbs resting lightly against each other. To anyone watching, I might have looked paralyzed by the accusation. In reality, I was just counting seconds. Sloane's attorney, a man named Vincent Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my car, paced back and forth like a shark sensing blood in the water. He was a specialist in aggressive estate litigation, the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. He had already filed an emergency petition, claiming that the assets of the Woods estate were in immediate peril under my supervision. He painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable, a predator who had swooped in when Grant Woods was vulnerable, isolating him from his loving family to steal a fortune. Sterling stopped directly in front of the judge's bench, slamming his hand down on the railing for emphasis. He gestured back toward me with a dismissive wave, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be discarded. She cannot be trusted, Your Honor, Sterling boomed, his voice filling the high ceilings of the courtroom. We are talking about an estate valued at over $8 million. This is a complex portfolio of investments, real estate, and liquid assets. And yet, the respondent has no financial background, no property management experience. She is a woman who, quite frankly, cannot be trusted with $5, let alone $8 million. He let the number hang in the air. $8 million. It was the only thing in the room that mattered to them. I looked past Sterling to the first row of the gallery. My parents, Grant and Marilyn, sat there like statues of aggrieved nobility. My father wore his dark navy suit, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief, looking everywhere except at me. They were posturing. They sat behind Sloane to show a united front, a visual confirmation that the family stood together against the outsider. The fact that the outsider was their other daughter did not seem to register. They looked at the judge with expectant faces, confident that the gavel was about to fall in their favor. They were sure the money was already theirs. They had probably already spent it in their heads. The judge, a man named Holloway, who looked like he had not had a good night of sleep in 20 years, rubbed his temples. He had likely heard 1,000 versions of this story before. Greedy children, senile parents, the squabble over the spoils. He looked down at the motion papers in front of him, then over the top of his reading glasses at me. Miss Woods, Judge Holloway said, his voice gravelly and tired, your sister and her counsel have made some very serious allegations here. They are requesting an emergency temporary conservatorship over the estate assets pending a full trial. They claim you are dissipating funds and that you exercised undue influence over the decedent. Do you have an objection? The room went silent. Sloane turned to look at me, a smirk touching the corner of her mouth. Sterling crossed his arms, waiting for me to stutter, to cry, to make a scene that would prove his point that I was unstable. I did not stand up. I did not reach for the microphone. Instead, I lifted my left wrist and looked at my watch. It was a simple analog watch with a leather strap, one I had bought at a discount store years ago. The second hand swept past the 12. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. I looked up at the judge, my expression completely blank. "Not yet," I said softly. The judge blinked, clearly confused. "Excuse me, I am waiting for the gatekeeper," I said. Sloane let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Your Honor, please." She is stalling. She is clearly overwhelmed. And the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The sound cut through Sloane's voice like a knife. It was not a tentative entrance. It was the heavy, deliberate push of wood against metal. Everyone turned. Sterling pivoted on his heel. My parents craned their necks. Sloane stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging slightly open. A man walked in. He was not what they expected. He was not another high-priced litigator in a bespoke Italian suit. He was a man of average height, with thinning gray hair and a posture that suggested a lifetime of sitting at a desk. He wore an off-the-rack gray suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders, and he carried a brown leather briefcase that was battered, scuffed, and worn soft at the handle. He looked like an accountant who had taken a wrong turn on his way to a tax audit. He did not look at Sloane. He did not look at my parents. He did not even look at me. He walked straight down the center aisle, ignoring the tension in the room as if he were walking through an empty hallway. The silence he brought with him was different than the silence I had held. My silence was waiting. His silence was heavy with authority. Sterling stepped forward, his chest puffed out, trying to regain control of his courtroom. "Excuse me, we are in the middle of a hearing. Who are you?" The man did not break his stride. He walked past the bar, past the plaintiff's table, and stopped only when he reached the clerk's desk. He set his battered briefcase down on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed. It sounded like a judge's gavel, but final. Only then did he turn to look at Sterling. His face was mild, his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses completely devoid of emotion. He looked like a man who dealt in numbers, not drama. "My name is Arthur Prynne," the man said. His voice was dry, lacking any theatrical inflection. "I am the senior trust officer for the Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank." The name of the bank seemed to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Sloane's brow furrowed. Sterling stiffened. I saw the recognition flicker in the lawyer's eyes. Cedar Ridge was not a local branch where you opened a checking account. It was a heavy hitter, a corporate institution known for managing complex, high-value trusts with ironclad rigidity. They did not get involved in family squabbles. They executed instructions. "I am here representing the bank." "Mr. Prynne continued, turning to the judge, "in its capacity as the successor trustee for the Grant Woods Family Trust." The air shifted instantly. It went from a family drama, full of screaming and tears and accusations, to corporate ice. Sloane's lawyer realized in a heartbeat that this was not the kind of opponent he could bully. He could yell at me. He could impugn my character. He could call me a leech, but he could not yell at a federally chartered bank represented by a man who looked like he had the entire tax code memorized. Sterling stammered for the first time. "Your Honor, we were not notified of any corporate trustee. We represent the direct heirs. This is an emergency petition for Mr." Prynne ignored him. He clicked the latches of his briefcase open. Snap, snap. The sound was distinct and sharp. He reached inside and pulled out a single, thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, an old-fashioned detail that looked jarringly serious in the fluorescent-lit modern courtroom. He handed the envelope to the court clerk, who passed it up to Judge Holloway. "This is a certified copy of the trust instrument, Mr." Prynne said. "Along with the acceptance of appointment by Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank, we accepted the role of trustee 3 years ago." Sloane turned to look at our parents. My mother's face had gone pale. Grant looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach. They had spent the last week tearing through Grandpa's house, looking for a will, looking for bank statements, looking for anything they could use. They had found nothing because there was nothing to find. Judge Holloway tore open the envelope. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the quiet room. He pulled out the document, a thick stack of paper bound in blue backing. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. Sloane stepped forward, her voice rising in panic. "Your Honor, whatever that is, it is a fabrication. My grandfather was incompetent. He was manipulated by her. She forced him to sign things he did not understand." The judge held up a hand, silencing her without looking up. He read the first page. Then he flipped to the second. He scanned the lines, his expression shifting from fatigue to interest. After a long moment, Judge Holloway looked up. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Sloane. "Miss Sloane Woods," the judge said, his voice very quiet, very calm. Sloane straightened, trying to rally her indignation. "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you aware," the judge asked, tapping the document with his index finger, "that your grandfather placed all of his assets into an irrevocable trust 3 years ago?" The word irrevocable hung there. It was a legal wall. It meant unchangeable. It meant that no matter how much they screamed, no matter how many lawyers they hired, the assets were not sitting in a personal account waiting to be grabbed. They were locked away in a vault that had been sealed while Grandpa was still alive. Sloane blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "No, that's impossible." He wouldn't do that." The judge looked at Mr. Prynne, "and the bank has control of the assets since the date of execution." "Your Honor," Mr. Prynne said smoothly, "the deeds to the real property are recorded in the name of the trust. The investment accounts are titled to the trust. The decedent retained a life estate for his use, but upon his passing, the management falls entirely to Cedar Ridge." Sterling tried to pivot, his face flushing red. "Your Honor, if this document exists, it was clearly signed under duress. We have witness testimony that the decedent was isolated." The judge cut him off. "Mr. Sterling, this is a notarized trust instrument drafted by a board-certified estate planning firm, with a corporate fiduciary appointed. This isn't a napkin we'll find in a drawer." I watched my father. He was gripping the back of the bench in front of him so hard, his knuckles were white. He knew what this meant. It meant he couldn't bully his way into the accounts. It meant he couldn't charm a judge into giving him emergency access. It meant he was dealing with a bank that had policies, lawyers, and zero emotional investment in his sob story. Sloane turned to me. Her eyes were wild. "You did this," she hissed, loud enough for the stenographer to hear. "You tricked him. You stole it." I stayed seated. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the oxygen tanks I had hauled. I thought about the nights I sat awake listening to Grandpa's breathing, terrified it would stop. I thought about the silence of his phone, the way he would look at the door on Thanksgiving, waiting for a car that never pulled into the driveway. They thought this was about money. They thought I was playing a game for a check. They had no idea. I looked at my watch again. 10:05. The judge was flipping through the document. He paused at a specific page. His eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice taking on a warning tone, "I suggest you take a moment to read Article 9 of this trust before you say another word on the record." Sterling walked up to the bench, snatched the document the clerk held out, and read. I watched his eyes scan the page. I watched the color drain out of his face. He stopped breathing for a second. "What is it?" Sloane demanded, tugging at his sleeve. "Vincent, what does it say?" Sterling looked at the judge, then at Mr. Prynne, and finally at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated fear. He realized he had walked into a trap. He had filed a hostile petition against a trust that had been designed specifically to catch people who filed hostile petitions. He whispered something to Sloane. I could not hear the words, but I saw her reaction. She took a step back, as if she had been slapped. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Woods, are you still asking the court for emergency control?" Sloane looked at me. For the first time, she really saw me. Not the little sister she used to boss around, not the paid help. She saw the person who had been sitting in the room when the decisions were made. I looked back at her. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just waited. The gatekeeper had arrived, And now, the lock was turning. People often ask me later how I sat in that wooden chair with such absolute stillness while my own sister turned my character into a demolition site. They wondered how I could watch my parents, the people who raised me, nod along as their lawyer painted me as a desperate, grasping failure. They assumed I was in shock. They assumed I was frozen by the betrayal. They were wrong. I was not shocked. I was not even surprised. The reason my pulse did not spike, the reason my hands did not shake, was because I had already lived through the ending of this story. I had lived it 3 years ago, on a rainy Tuesday morning, inside the quiet, carpeted office of the Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank. I am Lily Woods. I am 36 years old. To the outside world, and certainly to my family, I am the invisible daughter. I am the one who does not have a verified social media account. I am the one who drives a sedan that is 5 years practical, not a convertible that screams success. I am the one who moved into my grandfather's guest house not because I needed a place to live, but because he needed a person who would wake up when the house fell silent. When Sloane stood in that courtroom and accused me of manipulating Grandpa, of twisting his mind in his final fragile days, she was working off a script she had written in her head. In her version of the world, she was the beloved star, and I was the bitter extra who had seized control during the credits. But the truth was far less dramatic and far more bureaucratic. I was calm in court because I remembered the drive to the bank. It was 3 years ago. Grandpa had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure 6 months prior, and the reality of his mortality had settled over him like a heavy winter coat. He had called me into the main house at 6 in the morning. He was sitting in his leather armchair, fully dressed, his cane resting against his knee. "Lily," he had said, "get the keys. We are going to fix the roof before the rain starts." I did not understand him then. It was a sunny day, but I drove him. I drove him to Cedar Ridge, and I sat in the lobby while he went into the conference room with Arthur Prynne. I was not in the room when they signed the papers. I did not hold the pen. I did not read the terms. I sat in a wingback chair near the entrance, drinking lukewarm coffee and reading a magazine about Architectural Digest, waiting for him to finish. That was the difference between me and my family. I was willing to wait in the lobby. Sloane would have demanded a seat at the table. Grant and Marilyn would have tried to lead the meeting. I just waited. And when Grandpa came out, looking tired but unburdened, he did not tell me what he had done. He just patted my hand and said, "It is finished, Lily. Now we can just live." I knew, even then, that he had done something drastic. I did not ask what. I respected him enough to let him have his secrets. But I also knew my family. I knew that the moment he was gone, the silence would end, and the noise would begin. Sloane has always been the shiny one. That is not bitterness. It is just a fact of physics. She reflects light. She walks into a room and the energy shifts toward her. She has a laugh that sounds like champagne being poured, and she has made a career out of being looked at. My parents adored her for it. They saw themselves in her success. They saw their own vanity reflected in her beauty. I was different. I was the structural beam in the walls necessary, load-bearing, and entirely uninteresting until the roof caved in. The decline of Arthur Woods, my grandfather, was not the tragic, poetic fading away that movies like to portray. It was a gritty, exhausting, biological collapse. It was a job, and I was the only employee who showed up for the shift, for the last 3 years. My life was measured in milliliters and milligrams. I moved into the guest house, a small one-bedroom structure behind the main estate, so I could be there within 30 seconds if he pulled the emergency cord. I learned the rhythm of his breathing. I knew the difference between the sound of a sleep apnea snore and the terrifying silence of an obstruction. I managed the oxygen delivery schedule, ensuring we always had 3 backup tanks because Grandpa panicked if the gauge dropped below a quarter full. I organized his medication, a complex cocktail of diuretics, beta blockers, and blood thinners that had to be adjusted weekly based on his kidney function. I kept a logbook on the kitchen counter, a simple spiral-bound notebook where I recorded his blood pressure, his weight, his fluid intake, And his mood, 3 times a day, every day, for 1,095 days. My parents, Grant and Marilyn, treated his illness like a social inconvenience. They would call on Sundays, usually on speakerphone while they were driving somewhere more important. They would ask, "How is Dad doing?" in that bright, overly loud tone people use for children and the infirm. I would tell them the truth. I would say he is having a hard time breathing today, or his ankles are swollen, or he is confused about what year it is, and they would sigh. They would say, "Oh, that is so hard. Lily, you are a saint for handling that. We would love to come by. But Grant has that charity golf thing, and I have the committee meeting. Give him a kiss for us." They checked in. That was their defense. They checked in. But checking in is not caregiving. Checking in is watching a building burn from a safe distance and commenting on the height of the flames. Caregiving is running into the smoke with a bucket. Sloane was even worse. She visited exactly twice in those 3 years. Both times. She stayed for less than an hour. Both times. She took a selfie with Grandpa, carefully angling the camera so the oxygen tubes were hidden, captioning it with something about the wisdom of elders and precious time. She left as soon as he started to cough. She could not handle the reality of his body failing. It ruined the aesthetic. What none of them understood, what Sterling the lawyer had failed to research, was that I was not just a granddaughter playing nurse. I was a professional. My actual job, the one I did remotely from a laptop in the guest house living room while Grandpa napped, was for a boutique firm called Redwood and Gable Advisory. We did not advertise. We did not have a flashy website. We were a crisis management and lifestyle logistics firm for high-net-worth individuals. My clients were people with more money than sense, people who needed their lives organized, their scandals buried, and their chaotic schedules streamlined. I spent my days managing the lives of people who played dirty. I organized forensic audits for divorcing tech moguls. I coordinated security for politicians with secrets. I built timelines for legal defenses. I knew how to document a crisis. I knew that in the world of high stakes, the person with the best paper trail wins, always. Sauf erreur. When Grandpa's health began to slide, I did not just care for him, I documented him. It was not out of greed. It was out of a deep, instinctual dread. I knew my family. I knew that grief makes people irrational, but greed makes them strategic. I knew that the moment Grandpa took his last breath, the narrative would change. They would not remember the times they didn't visit. They would remember the times I said no to a visit because he was too sick. They would twist my protection into isolation. Grandpa knew it too. About 6 months before the end, we were sitting on the back porch. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. He was wrapped in a wool blanket, his breathing labored and shallow. "Lily," he whispered. The sound of his voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I am here, Grandpa." I said, "They are going to come for you." He said. I looked at him. I did not pretend to misunderstand. "They will come like debt collectors the minute I am gone." He continued. "Grant, Marilyn, Sloane, they feel entitled to what they have not earned. They will look at this house and see a bank account, and they will look at you and see an obstacle." I took his hand. It was cold and papery. "I can handle them," I said. He squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "You can, but you need to be ready. They will say I was confused. They will say you took advantage of an old man. They will say you are a criminal." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He was right. I had seen it happen to my clients at Redwood and Gable a dozen times. The vultures did not wait for the body to cool. So, I prepared. I treated my time with Grandpa like a case file. I saved every text message where I asked my parents to help, and they declined. I saved every voicemail where Sloane complained that visiting was too depressing. I kept the receipts for every gallon of milk, every prescription copay, every pair of non-slip socks I bought with his money. I noted every time I offered them a chance to speak to his doctors and they refused. I built a fortress of evidence, brick by brick, receipt by receipt. I did it quietly. I did not threaten them. I did not beg them to step up. I just let them be exactly who they were, and I wrote it down. The night Grandpa died. The house was very quiet. The hospice nurse had just left the room to give me a moment alone. The oxygen machine had been turned off, and the silence was deafening. I sat by his bed. His face was relaxed. The lines of pain finally smoothed out. I remembered the last lucid thing he had said to me, 2 days prior. He had woken up in the middle of the night, eyes clear, staring right at me. "Lily," he had rasped. "Yes, Grandpa." "Do not open the gate," he said. I leaned closer. "What gate?" "The gate," he insisted. "Do not open the gate for people who only love the lock." It took me a moment to understand. He was talking about access. He was talking about his life, his legacy, his trust. He was telling me that my parents and sister did not love the home he had built. They loved the security it provided. They loved the status. They loved the lock that kept the world out and the money in. He was telling me to keep it shut. So, sitting in that courtroom, watching the judge read the irrevocable trust that Grandpa and I had never discussed, I felt a profound sense of completion. The calm was not shock. It was the feeling of a soldier who realizes the ammunition they stockpiled is exactly the right caliber for the war that just started. Sterling, Sloane's lawyer, had called me a nobody. He said I could not be trusted with $5. He thought he was insulting a frantic, grieving daughter who was out of her depth. He did not know he was talking to a senior analyst at Redwood and Gable, who had spent 3 years building a counter-argument. He did not know that while they were buying black dresses and rehearsing their tears, I was waiting for the one man who held the only key that mattered. Mr. Prynne was the gatekeeper, and Grandpa had made sure that I was the only one standing on the inside of the gate. I looked over at my parents again. My father was whispering something to my mother, his face red with the frustration of a man who is used to getting his way. My mother looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. They were beginning to realize that the quiet daughter had not been idle. They were beginning to realize that the silence I had maintained for 36 years was not weakness. It was just the pause before the trap snapped shut. I turned my gaze back to the judge. He was asking Sloane a question, something about her knowledge of the estate's value. She was stammering, her voice high and thin, stripped of its earlier confidence. I checked my watch one more time. It was 10:15. The first phase was over. The ambush had failed. Now, the real work would begin. The trustee had opened the envelope, but I was the one who held the ledger, and unlike the trust, which was just about money, the ledger was about debt. Moral debt, emotional debt, the kind of debt that cannot be paid off with a check, the kind that follows you home and waits for you in the dark. I settled back into the hard wooden chair. I was ready to understand why I sat in that courtroom with a heart rate of 60 beats per minute while my family imploded. You have to understand the economy of the Woods family. I do not mean the macroeconomics of trust funds and interest rates. I mean the microeconomics of guilt. In our house, love was not a renewable resource. It was a currency, and according to my parents, I was perpetually overdrawn. The myth that defined my adult life began 14 years ago. When I was 22, I had just graduated from college and was working an unpaid internship, trying to get a foothold in the city. I woke up one night with a pain in my side that felt like someone was twisting a hot knife into my abdomen. It was an appendix rupture, sudden and violent. I did not have health insurance yet. The coverage from my new job was not set to start for another 3 weeks. My parents paid the hospital bill. It was roughly $22,000. At the time, they told me it was fine. They told me to focus on getting better. Grant and Marilyn stood by my hospital bed, holding my hand, looking every inch the concerned, supportive parents. But the moment the anesthesia wore off and the discharge papers were signed, that $22,000 stopped being a medical expense and became a moral mortgage on my existence. They pushed a narrative that I had cost them everything. They claimed they had to raid their retirement accounts to save me. They claimed they had to cancel trips, defer maintenance on the house, and tighten their belts, All because Lily had been irresponsible enough to let an organ burst inside her body. They used that story like a membership card to a club where I was the only servant. It started small. A year after the surgery, my mother called me. Her voice was tight, pitched in that specific frequency of distress she saved for financial requests. "Lily," she said, "we are a little short on the property tax bill this month. You know, ever since we had to handle your medical situation, the savings just haven't recovered. Do you think you could help us out? Just for this month, I paid it." I wrote a check for $2,000, which was half my savings at the time. I felt guilty. I felt like a burden. I told myself it was the right thing to do. But the month never ended. The requests became a rhythm, a background hum to my life. It was never a demand. They never screamed or threatened. That would have been too crude for Grant and Marilyn Woods. Instead, they slid the guilt across the table like a bill I had forgotten to tip on. It was the electricity bill in July because the air conditioning was expensive. It was the credit card minimums because my father needed a new suit for a networking event. It was the car insurance. It was the club dues. Every time I hesitated, every time I asked why they did not have the money, they would sigh. They would look at each other with weary eyes and say, "Well, we used to have a cushion, Lily, before the hospital. I spent my 20s funding their lifestyle while I shopped at discount grocery stores. I drove a car with a rattling muffler so my father could drive a sedan that commanded respect. I ate pasta with butter so my mother could go to lunch with her friends and not feel embarrassed. And then there was Sloane. If I was the debt, Sloane was the investment. Sloane never paid for anything in the twisted ledger of our family. Sloane's job was to be beautiful and successful looking. My parents reasoned that if Sloane looked rich, she would marry rich or become famous. And that would be a return on investment for everyone. So while I was transferring $1,200 to cover their water and gas bill, Sloane was posting pictures on Instagram of her self-care weekend at a spa in Napa. I remember one specific Tuesday. I was at my desk, staring at a bank alert that said my balance was dangerously low because I had just covered my parents' insurance premium. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from Sloane. She had posted a photo of a $40 brunch avocado toast, mimosas, the works. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to treat yourself because you are worth it." I looked at the utility bill on my desk. I looked at the photo, and I felt something inside me fracture. It was not jealousy. It was clarity. They did not treat Sloane this way because they respected her. They treated her this way because they feared her vanity. They treated me this way because they knew I had a conscience. They were strip-mining my guilt to fund her performance. Grandpa saw it all. For a long time, I thought he was oblivious. He lived in the big house on the hill, dealing with his own fading health, and my parents were very careful to present a polished image when they visited him. But looking back, I realized the emergencies always followed a pattern. When they had drained me dry, when I literally had nothing left to give, they would go to him. They would go to the big house and sit in his study. They would tell him about market downturns or unexpected expenses. They never mentioned that their daughter Lily had already paid $3,000 that month to keep their lights on. They just asked him for help. Grandpa was from a generation that believed in family duty, so he wrote the checks. But he was also a man who had built a fortune by noticing details that other people missed. The turning point happened 3 years ago, shortly before I moved into the guest house. It was Thanksgiving. My parents had hosted, which really meant I had cooked for 2 days while my mother arranged flowers. After dinner, we were all sitting in the living room. My father, Grant, cleared his throat. He put on his serious, head-of-the-household face. "Dad," Grant said to Grandpa, "we have a bit of a situation. The roof on our place is really failing. We got a quote, and it is going to be about $15,000 to fix it properly." We hate to ask, but he let the sentence trail off, waiting for Grandpa to fill the silence with a checkbook. I froze. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of coffee cups. 2 weeks earlier, I had given my father $8,000. He had told me it was for the roof. He had told me the contractor needed a deposit. I set the tray down. The china rattled. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly, I gave you $8,000 for the roof deposit 2 weeks ago." The room went deadly silent. Sloane looked up from her phone. My mother went pale. Grant turned to me, his eyes hard and warning. "Lily," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to shut me up. "That money had to be used for other things. You know how expensive things are right now. We had outstanding obligations." "What obligations?" I asked. He sighed, looking at Grandpa with a, "Can you believe her?" expression. "Medical bills. Actually, some lingering things. From the past." He was playing the card again, the appendectomy card. 14 years later, I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to finally let the rage out, but then I looked at Grandpa. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his son. He was sitting in his armchair, his hands resting on the head of his cane. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp. He looked from Grant, to the terrified look on my mother's face, to the bored expression on Sloane's face, and finally to me. He saw the fear in me. He saw the exhaustion. He realized in that moment that I was not just a dutiful daughter. I was a hostage. "I will handle the roof," Grandpa said quietly. My father exhaled. A sound of triumph disguised as relief. "Thank you. Dad, you know we would not ask if send the invoice to my accountant." Grandpa cut in. "Direct payment to the contractor. No cash transfers." My father stiffened. "Oh, well, sure, that is fine." It was not fine. I knew it, and Grandpa knew it. There was no contractor. There was no roof problem. They wanted the cash. That night, as I was washing the dishes, Grandpa came into the kitchen. He moved slowly, his breathing heavy. He stood next to me at the sink for a long time, watching the soapy water. "How much have you given them?" "Lily," he asked. I scrubbed a plate harder. "I do not know what you mean." "Do not lie to me," he said. "Not you. They lie to me. You do not." How much? I stopped scrubbing. I looked out the window into the dark backyard. "Over the years since the surgery." "Everything," I whispered. He nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. He looked sad. "They do not love me, Lily," he said, "and they do not love you. They love the idea of us. They love the safety we provide. I am the bank, and you are the credit line." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was old, the corners worn soft. "I have been keeping track," he said. "Not of the money. The money does not matter to me. I have been keeping track of the lies." He opened the book. I dried my hands and looked. It was a ledger, but it was not numbers. It was dates and events. June 12th. Grant asked for $5,000 for car repairs. Saw him driving a rental the next week. Car never went to shop. August 4th. Marilyn said she needed money for dental work. Sloane posted photos of them at the resort in Cabo 3 days later. November 24th. The roof, Lily paid. They asked again. He had been watching, all this time. While I thought I was alone in the trenches, he had been watching from the General's Hill. "You need to stop paying them." He told me. "I can't." I said, "They are my parents. They guilt me. They say I owe them for—" "You owe them nothing," he said firmly. "That medical bill, I paid that." I stared at him. The sponge fell out of my hand into the water. "What Grant came to me 14 years ago. He said, he told me you were sick. He told me they were struggling. I wrote them a check for $25,000 to cover the surgery and your recovery." The world tilted on its axis. For 14 years. I had carried the weight of a debt that never existed. They had taken the money from Grandpa, kept it, and then charged me for it again. They had double-billed their own father and their own daughter for the same trauma. That was the moment the daughter died, and the archivist was born. That was the moment I realized that love, in my family, was a scam, and the only way to survive a scam is to keep better records than the con artist. I looked at Grandpa. His eyes were fierce, burning with a cold. Protective anger I had never seen before. "We are going to stop this," he said. "But we have to be smart. If we cut them off now, they will come after you. They will destroy you. We have to build a wall they cannot climb. From that day forward, I did not just pay bills. I saved the receipts. I screenshotted the text messages where my mother asked for loans. I downloaded the bank statements that showed the transfers. I kept a digital log of every guilt trip, every lie, every contradiction. My job at Redwood and Gable taught me how to organize data for billionaires. But my family taught me why it was necessary. I learned that, in a family like mine, memory is a weapon. They would rewrite history to suit their needs. They would say they never asked. They would say I offered. They would say I was crazy. But a bank transfer does not have an opinion. A time-stamped text message does not have a memory lapse. Grandpa had his own name for the notebook he kept. He called it the quiet record. He told me that day in the kitchen that he was going to start a new section. He told me he was going to document every missed visit, every unreturned call, every time they showed up only to ask for something. He kept that notebook in the one place he knew they would never look. They would look in his safe. They would look in his desk. They would look under his mattress. But Grandpa kept the quiet record on the bookshelf, sandwiched between a copy of Great Expectations and a dusty volume on contract law. He knew my parents and Sloane never read books. They only looked at numbers. So when I sat in court and listened to them claim they were a loving family who had been shut out, I wasn't just relying on my memory. I was thinking about the bookshelf. I was thinking about the 14 years of extortion they had called parenting. They thought they were fighting a girl who used to pay their electric bill. They didn't realize they were fighting a woman who had learned that the only difference between a family and a cartel is the quality of the paperwork. And I had all the paperwork. The last 3 years of my grandfather's life were not measured in seasons or holidays. They were measured in the hum of an oxygen concentrator and the scratch of a pen against a logbook. The house, which had once smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, began to smell like rubbing alcohol and sterile gauze. It was a slow, creeping transformation. At first, it was just a cane by the door. Then, the rugs were rolled up and stored in the attic because they were tripping hazards. Then came the hospital bed, a hulking mechanical beast that dominated the center of the living room because the stairs had become an impossible mountain. I did not just live there, I patrolled. My life shrank to a 10-mile radius. I knew the pharmacists by name. I knew which delivery drivers would carry the heavy boxes of medical supplies all the way to the porch, and which ones would leave them in the rain. I managed a rotating schedule of home health aides, interviewing them with the scrutiny of a Secret Service agent because I was terrified of letting the wrong person into our fragile ecosystem. Sloane did not know the names of the aides. She did not know the difference between the morning pills and the evening pills. Sloane visited exactly 2 times in 3 years. The first time was shortly after Grandpa was discharged from the hospital. She swept in wearing a beige trench coat and heels that clicked loudly on the hardwood floors, a sound that made Grandpa flinch in his sleep. She brought a bouquet of flowers that were toxic to cats. We did not have a cat, but it showed how little she thought about the environment she was entering and a box of expensive chocolates he could not eat because of his swallowing difficulties. She spent 10 minutes hovering by the door, looking at the medical equipment with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. Then, she pulled out her phone. "Oh, Grandpa, look at you," she cooed, tilting her head to catch the light. "You look so distinguished. Let's get a picture for the memories." She adjusted his blanket, hiding the catheter bag. She smoothed his hair, not to comfort him, but to fix a stray cowlick. She posed with her cheek next to his, smiling that practiced, radiant smile that had garnered her thousands of followers. Click, click, click. Then Grandpa started to cough. It was a wet, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. His face turned red, and he grasped for the water cup with a shaking hand. Sloane recoiled as if he had slapped her. She stepped back, checking her coat for invisible droplets. "Oh, poor thing," she said, her voice tight. "I should go. I do not want to tire him out. You have this handled. Right, Lily." She was gone before his breathing returned to normal. Later that night, I saw the photo on her feed. The caption read, "Cherishing these quiet moments with my rock. Family is everything." It had 400 likes. The second visit was a year later. She stayed for 20 minutes, filmed a video of herself holding his hand while looking at the camera lens, not him, and left when the afternoon aide arrived to help with his hygiene routine. My parents were different. They did not visit for content. They visited for collateral. Grant and Marilyn would show up unannounced on random Tuesday afternoons. They would come in with a flurry of false energy, loud voices, and aggressive cheerfulness. "Hey, Dad." "Look at you," Marilyn would shout, as if his hearing was the problem. "We just stopped by to see how you are doing." But within 5 minutes, the conversation would pivot. My father would wander toward the study. He would ask about organizing the files. He would say things like, "Dad, tax season is coming up. I should really take a look at those investment statements for you, just to make sure the accountant is on top of things." Grandpa would tighten his grip on the armrests of his chair. "No," he would wheeze, "it is handled." "Lily will handle it." My father would give me that look, condescension laced with suspicion. "Lily is great, Dad, but these are complex matters. You know, grown-up matters." I would plant myself between them and the study door. Arms folded tight. He said no. "Dad." They'd storm out, muttering about how I was gatekeeping. They never saw what came after. They never saw Grandpa's blood pressure climb into the danger zone. They never saw the shaking that lasted for hours after they left. They never saw him cry, not from pain, but from the humiliation of realizing his own son was combing through his house like it was already up for grabs while he was still living in it. After one especially brutal visit, my mother trying to shame him into signing a check for a business opportunity, Grandpa reached for my hand. His fingers were light, almost weightless, but his eyes were pleading. "Don't let them in, Lily," he begged. "Please, I'm not a stage prop. I'm not an ATM. I just want to go in peace." That was the day I installed the safeguards. I did not do it to build a legal case. I did it because I was a caregiver protecting a patient. I installed a video doorbell so I could see who was at the gate without opening the door. I put a camera in the living room, ostensibly to monitor him if I was in the kitchen, but it also recorded the living area where visitors sat. I started keeping a detailed call log. Originally, it was to track insurance calls and doctor callbacks, but soon, it became a record of silence. May 3rd, called Grant to update on ER visit. Voicemail, no return call. June 10th, called Marilyn. She said she was at brunch and would call back. She never did. August 1st, Sloane texted, "Is he still kicking?" I did not reply. I created a binder for his medical care. It was 3 inches thick. It contained every discharge summary, every prescription, every note from the physical therapist. It was a testament to the sheer volume of work it took to keep a human being alive when their body was trying to quit. It was also, I realized later, proof of who was actually doing the work. Then came the day of the bank visit. It was a Tuesday in November, about 4 months before he passed. The morning was crisp and cold. Grandpa had woken up with a strange clarity. He asked for a shave. He asked for his good suit jacket, the one with the elbow patches, even though it hung loosely on his shoulders now. "We are going out." "Lily," he announced. I tried to argue. It was cold. He was weak, but he was adamant. "Get the car," he said. I drove him to Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank. That part, I knew. I sat in the lobby while he met with Mr. Prynne. But what happened after the bank was the part that confused me at the time, after he came out of the bank manager's office, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. I moved to help him back to the car. "Not yet," he said. "We have 2 more stops." "2 more, Grandpa. You are tired. Your oxygen." "I have the portable tank," he snapped. "Drive." He directed me to a medical office building on the other side of town. It was not his cardiologist. It was not his pulmonologist. It was the office of Dr. Eris Thorne, a specialist in geriatric psychiatry and cognitive neurology. I sat in the waiting room for an hour. My stomach was churning. I thought maybe his mind was slipping, and he had made this appointment to get help. I thought maybe he was scared of dementia. When he came out, Dr. Thorne was walking with him, the doctor, a serious man with silver hair, shook Grandpa's hand firmly. The report will be ready by tomorrow. Mr. Woods, the doctor said. I will have it notarized and sent directly to Mr. Prynne at the bank. Thank you. Doctor, Grandpa said. I helped him into the car. What was that about? I asked. Just a checkup, he said. Then he gave me the address for the third stop. It was a strip mall, of all places. A small storefront with a neon sign that said Mail and Notary Services. We walked in. There were 2 witnesses waiting, people I did not know. A woman who looked like a librarian and a man in a delivery uniform. They seemed to be expecting him. Grandpa pulled a document out of his inside pocket. He did not let me read it. He placed it on the counter. The notary asked for his ID. He asked Grandpa a series of questions. Do you know what day it is? Sir. Yes. It is Tuesday. November 14th. Do you know what this document is? Yes. It is an affidavit of intent. Are you signing this of your own free will entirely? He signed. The witnesses signed. The notary stamped it with that heavy, metallic clunk that sounds like a gavel hitting a desk. Grandpa took the document, folded it, and put it back in his pocket. Take me home. Lily, he said, I am tired now. That night, the house was very quiet. The effort of the day had drained him completely. He lay in the hospital bed in the living room, the nasal cannula humming softly. I sat in the armchair next to him, reading a book, or pretending to. Lily, he said softly. I looked up. Yes, Grandpa. You are wondering about today. I am. I admitted. He closed his eyes. The money does not matter. Lily, they think it is the prize, but it is just paper. He took a slow, rattling breath. I am not leaving them money, he whispered. I am leaving a decision. A decision I asked. I have set it up so they have to choose, he said. They can have the fight, or they can have the truth. They cannot have both, and I have set it up so they cannot steal it from you. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The blue was faded, milky with age, but the intelligence behind them was sharp. You are the only one who knows me. Lily, you are the only one who knows I'm still in here. They think I am a piece of furniture with a checkbook in the drawer. He reached out and tapped the back of my hand. When the time comes, he said, do not explain yourself. Do not apologize, and do not open the gate for people who only love the lock. I nodded, though I did not fully understand what he meant by the decision or the truth. I just thought he was being philosophical. I thought he was talking about the moral weight of inheritance. I did not know he was talking about a literal legal mechanism. I did not know that Dr. Thorne's report was a forensic capacity evaluation, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that on the very day he signed his trust assets over to the bank, he was of sound mind, oriented, and cognitively sharp. I did not know that the affidavit he signed at the strip mall was a sworn statement detailing exactly why he was restricting his children's access to his estate. He was building the wall. He was laying the bricks one by one, mortar and stone, right in front of my eyes. The dread I felt during those years, the fear of my parents, the fear of their anger, the fear of what they would do to me when he was gone was real. But Grandpa had felt it too, and unlike me, he had the power to do something about it. He spent his last 3 years dying, yes, but he also spent them preparing. As I sat in the courtroom, watching my sister squirm and my parents whisper frantically to their lawyer, I finally understood the look on his face that day coming out of the notary's office. It wasn't just relief. It was the grim satisfaction of a man who knows he has just won a fight that hasn't even started yet. He hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me a weapon, and he had wrapped it in the guise of a quiet, confused old man. So they would never see it coming until the trigger was already pulled. The timeline between a death and a lawsuit is shorter than people think. In the Woods family, it was exactly 72 hours. Grandpa passed away on a Thursday evening. It was peaceful. The oxygen machine simply stopped needing to work so hard, and his breath hitched, then settled into a silence that filled the entire house. I was holding his hand. I was the only one there. By Friday morning, the driveway, which had been empty for 3 years, was full of luxury cars. Sloane arrived first. She did not come to the guest house to find me. She went straight to the main house, letting herself in with a key she had not used in a decade. I found her in the kitchen, standing over the granite island, tapping furiously on her phone. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, presumably to hide the tears she had not shed. When I walked in, she did not hug me. She did not ask how the end had been. She did not ask if he had been in pain. "Lily," she said, her voice brisk and professional, "I am going to need you to gather the paperwork." I stopped in the doorway. "The paperwork." "The files," she said, not looking up from her screen. "The insurance policies, the bank accounts, the deeds. We need to get a handle on the inventory before the funeral. I do not want things getting messy." She spoke to me with the casual, dismissive tone one reserves for a hotel concierge or a cleaning lady. To her, I was not a sister. I was staff. I was the person who had been keeping the seat warm until the real management arrived to take over. My parents arrived an hour later. Grant and Marilyn walked in wearing black, their faces arranged in identical expressions of solemnity that lasted exactly until they closed the front door. Grant hugged me, but his eyes were already scanning the room, looking past my shoulder toward the hallway where the study was located. "So hard," he murmured, patting my back with a stiff, rhythmic thud. "So hard. Did he say anything at the end? About the arrangements?" "He meant the financial arrangements." "No," I said. "He just said he was tired." My mother wandered into the living room, running her hand along the back of the leather sofa. She picked up a crystal vase, checked the bottom for a maker's mark, and set it back down. "We will need to clear all this out," she said, gesturing vaguely at the medical equipment that I had not yet had the heart to remove. "It is depressing. We need to stage the house if we are going to list it in the spring." "List it?" I asked. "Well, obviously," Grant said, walking out of the study with a frown. "There is no point keeping a place this big. The market is up. We should liquidate while the interest rates are decent. By the way, Lily, where is the safe?" "The safe? The wall safe," Grant said, his voice sharpening. "The one behind the painting in the study. It is empty. The door is open and there is nothing in it." He looked at me then. The grieving sun mask slipped, revealing the panicked creditor underneath. "Where are the documents?" "Lily." I looked at him, then at my mother, then at Sloane, who had come into the room to watch. They formed a triangle of suspicion. "I do not have them," I said. Sloane crossed her arms. "Do not play games. Lily, we know you have been running his life. If you moved assets, if you touched anything, I did not touch anything," I said calmly. "Then where is the will Grant demanded? Where is the trust I do not know?" I lied. It was a partial lie. I knew where they were. They were in a fireproof vault at Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank, but I also knew that if I told them that, they would call the bank. They would try to charm Mr. Prynne. They would try to find a loophole before the court date. I needed them to panic. I needed them to feel like the money was slipping through their fingers. Because panic makes people sloppy. Panic makes people aggressive. And I needed them to be aggressive. Over the next 2 days, the house became a war zone. My parents practically tore the place apart. They pulled books off shelves. They looked under mattresses. They went through Grandpa's desk drawers, tossing old letters and sentimental photos onto the floor like trash. They were looking for the golden ticket, and they were finding nothing but dust. By Sunday, their fear had curdled into rage. Sloane took charge. She was used to getting what she wanted by force of personality, and when that failed, she hired people who were used to getting it by force of law. She hired Vincent Sterling on Monday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the process server arrived. He was a bored-looking man who handed me a thick stack of papers and left without a word. I sat down at the kitchen table and read them. It was an emergency petition for temporary conservatorship and an application to suspend powers. The language was brutal. It was not just a legal filing. It was a character assassination. The respondent, Lily Woods, has exercised undue influence over the decedent. The respondent isolated the decedent from his natural family. The respondent is suspected of dissipating assets and holding the decedent hostage in his own home hostage. I read that word twice. They were accusing me of holding him hostage. I looked around the kitchen where I had pureed his food when he could not chew. I looked at the living room where I had slept on a cot for 6 months so he would not be alone in the dark. I thought about the 3 years I had given up my social life, my career advancement, my sleep to ensure he felt safe, and they called it a hostage situation. My hand reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for a lawyer I knew from my work at Redwood and Gable. I wanted to fight. I wanted to file a counter motion immediately. I wanted to scream the truth into the record. But then I stopped. I remembered Grandpa's voice. "Do not open the gate." I remembered the notebook on the shelf. I realized that if I fought them now, in the hallway, in the preliminary stages, I might win the skirmish but lose the war. If I showed them the evidence now, the medical logs, the videos, the capacity report, they would retreat. They would withdraw the petition. They would say, "Oh, we made a mistake. Let's just split everything 4 ways." And they would get away with it. They would get their share of the money. And they would walk away thinking they had won. But that was not the plan. The plan was a trap. And for a trap to work, the prey has to walk all the way into the center. I needed them to file this petition with the court. I needed them to stand in front of a judge and say, on the record, under penalty of perjury, that Arthur Woods was incompetent and that I was a manipulator. Because of the no contest clause, I knew enough about estate law to know how these clauses worked. Most people think they are simple. If you challenge the will, you get nothing. But it is more specific than that. You have to actually challenge the validity of the trust. You have to argue that the person who signed it was crazy, or coerced, or tricked. If my family just complained about me being the executor, that was not enough. But if they filed a legal motion claiming Grandpa was incompetent when he signed his papers, they were striking the match. They were alleging that the trust itself was invalid because the creator was not of sound mind, if they put that in writing, and if I could prove they were lying. They would trigger the nuclear option. They would be disinherited, completely. So I did nothing. I put the papers down. I drank my coffee. I let the deadline for an initial objection pass. My silence emboldened them. They took it as weakness. They took it as an admission of guilt. Grant called me that afternoon. "We do not want to do this, Lily," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But we have to protect Dad's legacy. If you just hand over the accounts, we can drop the lawsuit. We can handle this as a family. I am seeing you in court, Dad," I said, Wednesday night, the night before the hearing. The tension was so thick I could taste it. I was staying in the guest house. They had taken over the main house. I could see the lights on in the living room. I could see them pacing. They were drinking wine, celebrating their imminent victory. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sloane. "Be smart, settle, or we ruin you. We will make sure everyone knows what you did to him. You will never work in this town again." I stared at the screen. She was threatening to destroy my reputation. She was threatening to paint me as an elder abuser to the entire world. I typed back a single line. "I already told you to wait." I did not explain what I was waiting for. I did not explain that I was not waiting for a settlement offer. I was waiting for the ink to dry. The next morning, the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. I did not wear black. I wore a navy blue suit, crisp and professional. I pulled my hair back. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who had nothing to hide. When I walked into the courthouse, I saw them. They were standing in a tight circle near the metal detectors. Sloane looked glamorous and tragic. My mother looked anxious. My father looked pompous. They saw me and stopped talking. Sterling, their lawyer, smirked. He thought he was walking into a slaughter. He thought he was about to cross-examine a terrified amateur. He did not know he was walking onto a landmine. I walked past them. I did not stop. I did not look at them. I entered the courtroom and took my seat at the defendant's table. I placed my hands on the table. I checked my watch. I knew what was about to happen. I knew that in less than an hour, they would stand up and read their petition into the record. They would accuse Grandpa of being senile. They would accuse me of being a thief. And the moment the judge accepted that filing, the trap would snap shut. The beauty of it was that I did not have to push them. I did not have to lure them. Their own greed was the gravity that was pulling them down. All I had to do was stand still and let them fall. Sloane walked in behind me, her heels clicking on the floor. She leaned over the railing as she passed my table. "Last chance. Lily," she whispered, "give us the keys to the kingdom, or we burn it down." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind the makeup. I saw the fear behind the threat. "You do not need keys." "Sloane," I said softly, "you are already locked in." She frowned, not understanding. She pulled back and went to sit with her lawyer. I turned my face forward. I focused on the empty judge's bench. I was not defending myself today. I was not there to argue. I was there to witness the execution of a judgment that had been passed 3 years ago in a quiet notary office. They wanted a fight. They were about to get a funeral. The sound of the heavy envelope being torn open was the loudest thing in the courtroom. It was a thick, fibrous sound, like a bandage being ripped off a wound that was not quite ready to be exposed. Judge Holloway did not rush. He was a man who seemed to appreciate the gravity of paper. He slid the document out, a formidable stack of pages bound in a stiff blue backing, and flattened it against his bench. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected off the glossy cover sheet. He adjusted his glasses, pushing them up the bridge of his nose, and began to read the header. I watched his eyes move, left to right, then they stopped. He frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in the manner of a man verifying a serial number. He looked up, addressing the room but focusing his gaze entirely on the legal counsel for my sister. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. His voice devoid of the earlier impatience. He sounded clinical now. "You have filed an emergency petition for temporary conservatorship of the estate of Grant Woods. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sterling said, standing straighter, sensing a shift but misinterpreting the direction. "We believe the assets are in immediate danger of dissipation, and you are asking this court to freeze the accounts and appoint your client, Miss Sloane Woods." As the interim administrator, Sterling nodded vigorously. "Precisely, Your Honor. To protect the estate." The judge looked back down at the document. He turned the first page. The paper made a sharp, crisp snap. "That will not be necessary," the judge said. Sterling blinked. "I beg your pardon. There is no estate to freeze, Mr. Sterling," the judge said. "Or rather, there is no estate that falls under the jurisdiction of a probate emergency, according to this instrument, which appears to be fully executed and notarized. Mr. Woods transferred the entirety of his assets into the Grant Woods Irrevocable Trust 3 years ago." The word irrevocable hit the air like a gavel strike. Sloane shifted in her seat. She leaned toward her lawyer. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Loud enough for me to hear. "It means," the judge continued, answering her before her lawyer could, "that your grandfather did not own these assets when he died. The trust owned them, and according to the terms here, upon his death, the management does not pass to his heirs. It passes to the successor trustee." The judge looked over at the quiet man in the gray suit. "Mr. Prynne," the judge asked, "is Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank prepared to accept this appointment?" Arthur Prynne stood up. He did not smooth his suit. He did not look around. He simply spoke to the bench. "We accepted the appointment 3 years ago." "Your Honor," Prynne said. His voice was dry, dusty, and absolutely unshakable. "The assets were titled to the trust on November 15th. 3 years prior, the deeds to the real estate, the brokerage accounts, and the liquid cash holdings are already in the custody of the bank. We have been managing the distributions for Mr. Woods's care since that date. The assets are secured in our vault. There is no emergency. There is no danger of dissipation." Sterling looked like he had swallowed a lemon. He was scrambling now, flipping through his own empty file folders as if the answer might magically appear in them. "Your Honor," he stammered, "we were not notified of this. My client is a direct beneficiary. She had a right to know if the estate planning was altered." The judge looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "Mr. Sterling, you know as well as I do that a grantor is under no obligation to notify beneficiaries of an inter vivos trust during his lifetime. It is his money. He can do what he likes with it, but the undue influence. Sterling pivoted, his voice rising. We have alleged that the decedent was incompetent when he made these decisions. If he was coerced into creating this trust, then the trust is void. I sat very still. This was the moment. This was the trigger. Sterling had just doubled down. He had just confirmed, on the record, that his strategy was to attack the validity of the document itself. The judge narrowed his eyes. He flipped further into the document. He seemed to be looking for something specific. He turned past Article 1, past the distribution schedules, past the definitions. He stopped at Article 9. I saw a small flicker of surprise on the judge's face. He ran his finger down the paragraph, reading it twice. Then he looked up. This time, he did not look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Sloane. Then he looked at my parents, Grant and Marilyn, sitting in the gallery. Mr. Sterling, the judge said softly, I am going to read Article 9 of this trust into the record. I strongly suggest you and your clients listen very closely. The room went deadly silent. Even the court stenographer seemed to pause, her hands hovering over the keys. The judge began to read. Article 9, the no contest clause. My father's face went slack. He knew what those words meant. He was a businessman, or at least he pretended to be one. He knew that a no contest clause was standard language. Usually, it just meant you couldn't argue about who got the china, but Grandpa had not used standard language. If any beneficiary under this trust, the judge read, enunciating every syllable, directly or indirectly contests the validity of this trust, or attacks the competency of the grantor to establish this trust, or seeks to set aside any of its provisions. The judge paused. He looked at the petition Sterling had filed, the petition that explicitly accused Grandpa of being incompetent, then the right of that beneficiary to take any interest given to him or her by this trust shall be revoked and determined as if that beneficiary had predeceased the grantor without issue. The judge lowered the paper. Sloane was frowning. She looked confused. Without issue. What does that mean? It means, Miss Woods, the judge said, his voice cutting through the room like a cold wind, that if you challenge the validity of this trust which you have just done by filing a petition alleging incompetence, you are disinherited. You get nothing. Zero. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sloane's face changed. It did not crumble into grief. It did not flush with anger. It drained of color until she looked like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was the look of someone watching a building collapse with their wallet inside. She turned to Sterling. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Fix it, she hissed. Vincent, fix it. Sterling was sweating now. Visible beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He realized he had just walked his client into a guillotine. Your Honor, he said, his voice cracking. At this time, the petitioner moves to withdraw the petition. He tried to say it casually. Just a little administrative error. Just a take-back. We withdraw the allegations of incompetence, Sterling said. Faster now. We are willing to accept the trust as valid. We just want to ensure proper administration. So, we withdraw the filing. The judge looked at him. He did not smile. He did not nod. He looked down at the court clerk. Has the petition been docketed? The judge asked. The clerk nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It was filed and entered into the record at 9 a.m. this morning. The judge looked back at Sterling. Motion to withdraw is denied. Sterling froze. Your Honor, surely you filed the paper. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, you stood in my courtroom and argued that the decedent was incompetent. You made the attack. You cannot unring that bell just because you suddenly realized the price of the toll. The judge tapped the blue-back document. The trigger in this clause is not the success of the challenge, the judge explained. His voice hard. It is the attempt. The trust states that if a beneficiary seeks to set aside the provisions based on competency, they forfeit their share. You sought. You filed. The act is complete. My father, sitting in the row behind Sloane, made a sound like a balloon deflating. He slumped back against the wooden bench. He was realizing that the strategy of intimidation, the strategy that had worked on me for 14 years, the strategy that had worked on contractors and waiters and business partners did not work on a contract. You could not bully a piece of paper. Sloane stood up. She forgot the courtroom etiquette. She forgot the act. "No," she screamed. "That is $8 million. You cannot just take it. He was my grandfather." She pointed at me. She turned her entire body, her finger trembling as she aimed it at my face. "She did this," Sloane shrieked. "She tricked him. She wrote that he would never cut me out. He loved me." The judge banged his gavel. It was a sharp, angry crack. "Sit down, Miss Woods." "She tricked him," Sloane yelled, her voice breaking into a sob of pure financial panic. "She is a thief, Mr. Sterling. Control your client or I will have her removed," the judge warned. Sterling grabbed Sloane's arm and pulled her down. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a person who had already spent the money in her head and was now staring at a terrifyingly zero balance. The judge turned to Mr. Prynne. "Mr. Prynne, does the trust outline a distribution for Miss Sloane Woods?" "It does, Your Honor," Prynne said calmly. "Or rather, it did. She was to receive 25% of the residual estate." "And what happens to that share now that Article 9 has been triggered?" the judge asked. Prynne did not even check the document. He knew it by heart. It flows back into the residue of the trust, to be distributed to the remaining beneficiary. The remaining beneficiary. My parents looked at me. Sloane looked at me through her mascara-stained tears. Sterling looked at me with the hatred of a man who knows he is going to get sued for malpractice. I sat there, my hands folded on the table. I felt the gaze of the entire room. I felt the weight of the last 3 years lifting off my shoulders. The nights of worrying, the fear of their inevitable attack, the dread of this exact moment. It was gone. I looked at Sloane. I met her eyes. They were red, puffy, and full of hate. She mouthed a word at me. "Bitch." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I leaned forward slightly, just enough so that she could see the expression on my face. It wasn't triumph. It was exhaustion. I wasn't waiting for justice. I said quietly. My voice was low. But in the silence of the courtroom, it carried perfectly to her table. Sloane froze. I was waiting for paperwork. I finished. I looked at my watch. It was 10:30. The hearing had lasted exactly 30 minutes. In half an hour, they had gone from aggressive predators to disinherited strangers, and they had done it to themselves. Grandpa hadn't cut them out. He had simply handed them a knife and watched them trip. The judge cleared his throat. "The court recognizes the Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank as the sole trustee." The judge ruled, "The petition for emergency conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice, based on the existence of the valid trust instrument, and regarding the application of Article 9. He looked at Sterling with a look of pity. "I am scheduling a separate hearing to determine the final status of the beneficiaries, but Mr. Sterling, I suggest you tell your client to start looking for a job." The gavel came down. Bang. It was over. The envelope was open. The blade had dropped, and the silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The silence that followed the judge's ruling on the no contest clause was heavy, but it was fragile. It shattered the moment Sloane realized that her tears were not going to work as currency. Panic is a volatile fuel, and when the reality of disinheritance hit the table, my family did not retreat. They mutated. Sloane wiped her face. The mascara streaks were still there, dark and jagged, but the tragedy in her expression hardened into something sharp and ugly. She realized that playing the victim of a confusing legal document had failed. So she pivoted to the only strategy she had left: character assassination. She stood up again, ignoring her lawyer's restraining hand. "This is a setup," she spat, her voice gaining a frantic, shrill edge. "You cannot enforce that clause because he did not know what he was signing. And do you know why? Because she made sure he did not talk to anyone else." She pointed a finger at me. The nail painted a dark, blood red. "She isolated him." Sloane screamed. She changed the locks on the house. She blocked our numbers from his phone. I tried to call him every single week for 3 years, and I never got through. She kept us away so she could brainwash him. Sterling, seeing a lifeline, jumped up. Yes, Your Honor. This goes to the heart of the undue influence claim. The respondent engaged in a systematic campaign of isolation. My clients were physically and digitally barred from contacting their father. If Mr. Woods signed that trust, he did so in a vacuum created by the respondent. My father, Grant, sensed the momentum shifting. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, composing his face into a mask of righteous sorrow. He decided to add a specific, heartbreaking detail to the narrative. "It is true, Your Honor," Grant said, his voice deep and trembling with performative emotion. "I did not want to bring this up, but last Christmas, it breaks my heart to say this." He paused for effect, looking at the gallery, then at the judge. "Last Christmas, my wife and I drove over to the house to see Dad. We had gifts. We had a dinner we had cooked for him. We stood on that front porch for 20 minutes, ringing the bell, knocking on the door. We could see the lights on inside. We knew they were home, but she would not open the door. She left her own parents standing in the freezing cold on Christmas Eve because she did not want us to see how bad he had gotten. She shut us out." My mother let out a small, choked sob from the bench. It was perfect. It was a scene straight out of a movie the loving family left in the snow by the cruel, gatekeeping daughter. The gallery murmured. I could feel the eyes shifting. The legal technicalities of the trust were one thing, but elder abuse, isolation, cruelty on Christmas. That resonated. The air in the room grew thick with judgment. I saw the stenographer look at me with disgust. I sat perfectly still. I did not shake my head. I did not roll my eyes. I just looked at my watch. It was 10:35. Judge Holloway looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the man in the gray suit. "Mr. Prynne," the judge said, "the successor trustee has a duty to understand the circumstances of the grantor. To your knowledge, was the decedent prevented from communicating with his family? Was he isolated?" Arthur Prynne did not look up immediately. He was busy with the latches of his battered briefcase. Snap, snap. He lifted the lid. He did not pull out a legal brief. He reached in with both hands and pulled out 2 distinct items. The first was a thick, spiral-bound stack of papers, secured with a heavy rubber band. The second was a small, worn leather notebook with a cracked spine. He placed them on the clerk's desk with a deliberate thud. "Your Honor, Mr. Prynne said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a scalpel. "Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank takes the allegations of isolation very seriously when we assumed the trusteeship 3 years ago. We established a protocol to monitor the grantor's social environment." He untied the rubber band on the stack of papers. "These are the itemized telecommunications records for Mr. Arthur Woods's landline and personal cellular device for the past 36 months. We subpoenaed them directly from the provider as part of our standard audit." He opened the leather notebook. "And this, Mr. Prynne said, placing his hand on the cover gently, "is what Mr. Woods referred to as the quiet record." Sloane frowned. "What is that?" "It is a handwritten log," Mr. Prynne answered, looking at her for the first time. "Mr. Woods kept it on his person. He recorded every interaction he had with his family. He also recorded every interaction he did not have." Sterling objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. It is a private diary. It cannot be entered as evidence without authentication." The judge held up a hand. "The petitioner has made the decedent's state of mind and his alleged isolation the central issue of this hearing. If this log reflects his experience of those events, it falls squarely under the state of mind exception. I will allow it. Proceed, Mr. Prynne." Prynne adjusted his glasses. He opened the phone records to the first marked page. Then he opened the notebook to a corresponding date. "Let us address the claim of blocked calls." Prynne said, "Miss Sloane Woods, you just stated on the record that you tried to call your grandfather every week for 3 years. "I did," Sloane insisted. "She blocked me." Prynne ran his finger down the column of the phone bill. "I am looking at the records for the entire first year of the trust." Prynne said, "There are no incoming calls from your number." Miss Woods? Not one. Sloane's face reddened. Well, I called the house line. Pryn flipped a page. This includes the house line. There are 0 incoming calls from you. However, there are 3 outgoing calls from Mr. Woods to you. He looked at the notebook. Entry dated March 12th. Pryn read aloud. Grandpa's handwriting was shaky but legible. Called Sloane to wish her happy birthday. Went to voicemail. Left a message asking her to visit. No call back. Pryn looked up. The phone records confirm a call of 1 minute and 12 seconds placed to your number on that date. There is no return call on the record for the next 4 months. The courtroom was silent. Sloane shifted in her seat. I was busy, she muttered. Pryn ignored her. He turned to another page. Let us look at June, he said. Father's Day. He read from the notebook. Grant promised to come by after his golf game. Said he would bring dinner. I waited on the porch until 8 o'clock. The food got cold. I ate a sandwich alone. Pryn held up the phone records. On that date, there is an incoming call from Grant Woods at 8:15 in the evening. It lasted 30 seconds. He looked at my father. Mr. Woods? Would you like to tell the court what you said in that 30-second call? Grant looked like he was choking. I don't recall. Pryn read the next line from the notebook. Grant called. Said the traffic was bad and he was too tired. I could hear the television in the background. He was already home. The gallery was no longer murmuring. They were listening with a rapt, horrified attention. The picture of the confused old man was dissolving, replaced by the image of a lonely grandfather sitting on a porch, waiting for a son who could not be bothered to drive 10 miles. But let us address the specific incident Mr. Woods just described, Pryn said. The Christmas Eve incident. My father stiffened. He looked at his lawyer, then at the judge. He looked like a man who realized he had just stepped into a bear trap. You stated you were locked out, Pryn said. You stated you stood in the freezing cold with gifts. That is right, Grant said, though his voice was significantly quieter. We were there. Pryn flipped to the notebook. The pages were near the end of the book. The handwriting was fainter here, the letters more jagged as Grandpa's strength had failed. Entry dated December 24th. Pryn read, Grant called at 4 in the afternoon, asked if I had sent the check for the property tax yet. I told him the trust handles the bills now. He got angry. He said if he could not have the money, there was no point in driving all the way over for a dry turkey. Pryn paused. He let the words hang in the air. There was no point in driving all the way over for a dry turkey. Pryn continued reading. Marilyn got on the phone. She said they were going to the club instead. They did not come. Lily made a roast chicken. We watched a movie. It was quiet. I'm glad they did not come. Pryn closed the notebook. He placed his hand flat on the cover. He then picked up the phone record. Incoming call from Grant Woods. December 24th, 4:02 in the afternoon. Duration 4 minutes. There are no other calls. There is no record of a gate code access. There is no footage on the security system of anyone arriving at the door. Pryn looked directly at my father. You were not on the porch. Mr. Woods, you were asking for money, and when you were refused, you abandoned him. My father's face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. This is an invasion of privacy, he shouted. Pointing at the notebook. You cannot read that. Those are private family matters, Sterling jumped in. Your Honor, I must object. This is highly prejudicial. The decedent's private ramblings are not proof of fact. Judge Holloway leaned forward. His face was like granite. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. Your client just perjured himself in my courtroom. He invented a story about being locked out in the snow to support an allegation of elder abuse. This evidence proves that not only was he not locked out, he voluntarily chose not to visit because his financial demands were not met. The judge looked at the gallery. The shift in the room was palpable. 10 minutes ago, the people in the back rows, the clerks, the bailiffs, the curious onlookers had looked at me with suspicion. They saw a young woman who had taken control. Now, they were looking at my parents and my sister with open revulsion. They saw the expensive suits, the jewelry, the manicures, and they saw the truth underneath. They saw parasites. The loving family narrative had not just collapsed, It had been incinerated. Sloane was slumped in her chair, staring at the table. She knew it was over. She knew that the social darling image she had cultivated was about to be destroyed if this public record ever got out. My mother was crying, but this time, the tears were real. She was crying because she was ashamed, or perhaps she was crying because she realized that the check for the property tax was never coming. Prin put the notebook back in the briefcase, but he left the phone records on the table. The trustee submits these exhibits to refute the claim of isolation, Prin said calmly. The decedent was not isolated by the respondent. He was abandoned by the petitioners. The respondent, Lily Woods, was the only reason he had any companionship at all. I looked at my parents. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a cold, hollow vindication. They had spent years telling me I was the debt, the burden, the one who owed them. They had spent years rewriting history to make themselves the heroes of a story where they were the villains, but Grandpa had written it down. He had etched their neglect in ink. I looked at Grant. He could not meet my eyes. He looked down at his shoes, a man who had been stripped naked in a room full of strangers. I leaned back in my chair. The quiet daughter didn't have to scream. The notebook was screaming for me, and it was louder than they could ever be. My father, Grant, was a man who had built his entire life on the foundation of plausible deniability. He was an expert at the half-truth, the misunderstood date, the convenient lapse in memory. When the Christmas lie collapsed under the weight of the trustee's evidence, I watched him scramble for a foothold. He did not apologize. He did not look ashamed. He looked for a technicality. He stood up, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was suddenly too small to contain his sweat. I may have misspoken about the date, Your Honor, Grant stammered, his voice pitching higher. It has been a stressful time. It wasn't Christmas. I was confused. It was Thanksgiving. That was the night. He pointed a shaking finger at me. It was Thanksgiving, he insisted, gaining a little more confidence as he convinced himself of the new lie. We went there to share a meal. We went there to be a family, and she refused to open the door. We could hear him inside. We knew he was awake. She kept us on the porch like beggars. That is isolation. That is cruelty. I looked at Arthur Prin. The trustee did not look surprised. He did not look annoyed. He looked like a man who had read the script beforehand and was just waiting for the actor to hit his mark. Mr. Prin, the judge said, his voice tight with impatience. Does the quiet record have an entry for Thanksgiving? Prin did not need to search. He flipped the leather notebook to a page that was already marked with a yellow sticky note. It was the only bookmarked page in the entire volume. It does, Your Honor, Prin said. Read it, the judge commanded. Prin flattened the book against the table. The spine cracked. A dry sound in the silent room. Entry dated November 24th, Thanksgiving Day. Prin read, Grant and Marilyn arrived at 9:30 at night. They were 3 hours late. I had already eaten alone. Prin paused, letting the timestamp sink in. 9:30 was not a dinner time for an 80-year-old man with heart failure. It was the middle of the night. I heard the car screech in the driveway. Prin continued, reading Grandpa's shaky script. They came to the door. They were shouting. I could hear Grant yelling at Marilyn. They were both intoxicated. My father flinched as if he had been struck. That is a lie, he shouted. We had a glass of wine with dinner. We were not intoxicated. Prin raised his voice slightly. Overriding the interruption, they started pounding on the door. Prin read, Grant hit the glass so hard I thought it would shatter. He was screaming my name. He was screaming that I owed him money for the trip. He said I was a selfish old man. I was terrified. I thought he was going to break the door down. The courtroom was deadly quiet. This was not a story of a family shut out. This was a story of a home invasion. I turned off the lights. Prin read, I hid in the pantry behind the kitchen. I took the phone with me. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped it twice. I sat on the floor and prayed they would leave. My mother let out a low moan. She covered her mouth with her hand. She remembered that night. I could see it in her eyes. She remembered the rage. The entitlement. The way they had drunkenly stormed his sanctuary because they felt the world owed them a living. And then, Prynne produced the smoking gun. He reached into the folder of phone records and pulled out a single sheet. He held it up. "Your Honor," Prynne said, "this is the call log from Mr. Woods's landline for the night of Thanksgiving. At 9:32 in the evening, there is an outgoing call." He placed the paper on the judge's bench. "Who did he call?" The judge asked softly. "He dialed 911. Prynne said. The air left the room. My father stopped breathing. Sloane froze. "He called emergency services." Prynne repeated. The call lasted 12 seconds. He did not speak. The transcript shows an open line, with the sound of pounding and shouting in the background. Then, the sound of a car engine starting. Mr. Woods hung up the moment he heard them drive away. Prynne looked at my father with eyes like flint. "He did not call you to let you in, Mr. Woods. He called the police to keep you out. He was so afraid of his own son that he was ready to ask armed officers to remove you from his property." Grant slumped back onto the bench. He looked small. The bluster was gone. The narrative of the wounded, loving son had been replaced by the reality of a drunken, violent intruder. Sterling, the lawyer, saw his case disintegrating. He stood up, but his movements were jerky, desperate. "Your Honor, this is clearly paranoia," he argued, his voice thin. The decedent was 80 years old. He was confused. He misinterpreted a spirited family visit as a threat. The fact that he called the police on his own family proves his mental state was deteriorating. It proves he was not competent. The judge looked at Sterling with an expression of profound disgust. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "are you suggesting that fear of a drunken man pounding on a glass door at night is evidence of insanity? Because in this court, we call that a reasonable reaction to a threat." But he was confused. Sterling insisted. He was paranoid. The judge leaned forward. His tone changed. It shifted from judicial referee to something far more dangerous. "Counselor, be very careful," the judge warned. "Your clients have already placed false statements on the record regarding the Christmas visit. Now, we have evidence that contradicts their testimony regarding Thanksgiving. Perjury is a felony if you continue to push a narrative that is demonstrably false. I will not just dismiss this petition, I will refer this matter to the district attorney." Sloane snapped. The pressure was too much. The money was gone. Her reputation was hanging by a thread. The judge was threatening jail time. She lost the ability to calculate. She only felt the rage of someone who had been denied what she believed was hers by birthright. She stood up, knocking her chair back. It clattered loudly against the floor. "He was incompetent," she screamed. Her face was twisted, ugly with entitlement. He was crazy. He did not know what he was doing. Sloane Sterling tried to grab her, but she shoved him away. "She did this," Sloane yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She poisoned him against us. She wrote those lies in that book, and she made him sign that trust." She walked toward the partition, her eyes wild. He could not have signed those papers. He did not even know what day of the week it was. She put the pen in his hand. She held his hand and made him sign it. "It is a fraud." The accusation hung in the air. She had done it. She had explicitly, violently, and on the record, attacked the competency of the grantor. She had just hammered the final nail into her own coffin regarding the no contest clause. But she had also accused me of a crime. She had accused me of forgery and coercion. I looked at Prynne. He was already moving. The trustee reached into his briefcase for the third and final time. He did not bring out a notebook. He did not bring out phone records. He brought out a thick, sealed plastic packet. It looked heavy. It was stamped with red ink. "Your Honor," Prynne said, his voice raising just enough to cut through Sloane's heavy breathing. "Since the petitioner has doubled down on the allegation that the decedent was incompetent at the time of signing, and has specifically accused the respondent of physical coercion, the trustee enters Exhibit C." He handed the packet to the clerk. "This is what we call the capacity packet," Prynne explained. The judge took it. He looked at the seal. 3 years ago, on the day the trust was signed, Mr. Woods did not just go to the bank, Prynne said. He made 2 other stops. I watched my parents. They looked confused. They didn't know about the stops. They thought he was just an old man sitting in a chair. The first stop was at the office of Dr. Eris Thorne, a board-certified forensic psychiatrist. Prin said, "Included in that packet is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Thorne, dated and time-stamped 2 hours after the trust was signed. It details a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Dr. Thorne attests that Arthur Woods was fully oriented, possessed superior recall, and demonstrated a clear, uncoerced understanding of his assets and his heirs." Sloane shook her head. "That is just one doctor. You could have paid him off." Prin ignored her. "The second document is a notarized affidavit of intent, signed by Mr. Woods at a separate location." Prin continued, "But the trustee recognized that in high-conflict families, paper is often not enough." He pointed to a USB drive attached to the front of the packet. "So we took an additional step. The judge picked up the drive." "What is this?" "Mr. Prin." "It is a video recording," Prin said. Sloane went pale. "It was recorded in the notary's office," Prin said. "In the video, the notary asks Mr. Woods if anyone is forcing him to sign. Mr. Woods answers. He then asks Mr. Woods to explain, in his own words, why he is structuring the trust this way." Prin turned to look directly at Sloane. "He does not sound confused, Miss Woods. He looks directly at the camera, and he says, quite clearly, that he is doing this because he knows his family will try to destroy his granddaughter Lily the moment he is dead. He says he is signing this to protect the only person who ever protected him." The courtroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "There are 2 tracks here, Your Honor," Prin said, turning back to the bench. "On one track, we have the self-serving, contradictory, and perjured testimony of 3 people who are desperate for money. On the other track, we have a forensic medical evaluation, a notarized affidavit, and a video confession from the decedent himself, all created on the very day the trust was executed." The judge looked at the packet. He looked at the USB drive. He did not need to watch it yet. The existence of it was enough. The allegation that the respondent put a pen in his hand is not just false. Prin concluded, "It is a mathematical impossibility. The evidence shows that Mr. Woods was the one holding the pen, and he was holding it with a very steady hand." Sloane sank back into her chair. She looked small. She looked defeated. The narrative she had built, the story of the evil sister and the senile grandfather, had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the very man she had underestimated. The judge looked at me. "Miss Woods," he said, "you have been very quiet. Do you have anything you wish to add to the record regarding these accusations?" I stood up. My legs felt steady. My voice was calm. I did not look at the judge. I looked at my sister. I looked at my parents. I saw them for what they were. They were not monsters. They were just small, greedy people who had gotten used to getting their way. They were people who thought that being loud was the same thing as being right. I did not tell him what to do. I said, my voice carried to the back of the room. I looked at Grant, who was staring at the floor. I looked at Sloane, who was staring at nothing. I helped him make sure you could not lie about him after he was gone. I said, I sat back down. Sterling closed his laptop. He knew it was over. He knew he wasn't getting paid. The judge looked at the exhibits one last time. He looked at the phone records that showed the 911 call. He looked at the notebook that chronicled the abandonment. He looked at the packet that proved the competence. "The court finds that the allegations of incompetency are without merit," the judge said, his voice flat and final. "The court further finds that the petitioners have engaged in a pattern of dishonesty that borders on contempt." He looked at Sloane. "Miss Woods, you wanted a fight? You have lost, and thanks to your outburst just now, you have successfully triggered the no contest clause for a second time. There is no ambiguity left. You are out." Sloane did not scream this time. She just put her head in her hands. She was doing the math. She was realizing that the brunch photos, the lifestyle, the apartment she couldn't afford, it was all gone, and the gate was locked. The video on the USB drive was damning. But Arthur Prynne was not finished. He stood at the clerk's table, a man who looked less like a bank officer and more like an executioner who had simply forgotten to wear his hood. The capacity packet sat heavy on the judge's bench, a physical anchor that held the truth in place while my family's lies floated away like ash. Judge Holloway looked up from the medical affidavits. He adjusted his glasses, and the glare on the lenses hit his eyes, making him look impersonal and terrifying. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "The court is looking at invoices here. These are not just medical opinions. These are billing records." He held up a sheet of paper. "Doctor, Thorne's evaluation was not a last-minute emergency appointment," the judge noted. "It was scheduled 6 weeks in advance. It was paid for directly from Mr. Woods' personal checking account. And here is a second invoice from a doctor, Arnstein, a clinical psychologist who performed a separate, independent verification of capacity 3 days prior to the signing." The judge looked at the defense table. "You allege that the respondent, Lily Woods, rushed the decedent to a bank and forced a pen into his hand. You alleged impulsive coercion. Yet the evidence shows a timeline of meticulous, independent planning that predates the signing by months." Sterling wiped his forehead. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume he had borrowed. "Your Honor, we were unaware of these appointments, if we had known. If you had known, you might not have filed a frivolous petition," the judge cut in. "But you did file it, and in doing so, you and your clients have created a direct conflict between your sworn statements and the forensic reality." The judge leaned forward. The wood of the bench creaked. "Let me be clear," the judge said. "We are moving past the realm of civil dispute. When you stand in court and claim a man was incompetent while I hold proof that he was clinically lucid, we enter the territory of perjury. We enter the territory of attempted fraud against an estate." Sloane shrank in her seat. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for the first time. She wanted me to stop it. She wanted the little sister who used to fix her problems to intervene. But I just sat there. I was not the driver of this vehicle anymore. I was just a passenger. Arthur Prynne cleared his throat. It was a dry, small sound, but it drew the room's attention instantly. "Your Honor," Prynne said, "in light of the petitioner's continued hostility and the fraudulent nature of the accusations, the trustee is compelled to activate the secondary protection mechanism outlined in the trust." My father, Grant, looked up. He had been staring at the floor, hoping to vanish. "Secondary protection?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Prynne opened the trust document again. He turned to the back, to a section that everyone, including Sterling, had apparently skimmed over. Article 12, Section 4. Prynne announced, "The hostile petition audit trigger." Sterling froze. "Excuse me, Mr. Woods was a businessman," Prynne said calmly. "He understood that in families like this, money is often moved around informally. He anticipated that if his heirs were denied the inheritance, they might claim that they were owed money. They might claim that previous transfers were payments, or that they had been promised funds." Prynne looked at my father. "Therefore, Article 12 states that if any beneficiary files a petition challenging the trust, it automatically triggers a forensic audit of all financial transfers made from the grantor to that beneficiary over the preceding 10 years. My father's face went the color of old milk. "An audit," Grant whispered. "Correct," Prynne said. "The trust stipulates that any money transferred to a challenging beneficiary during that period, unless explicitly documented as a gift with a filed gift tax return, shall be reclassified as a demand loan payable immediately to the estate." The room went silent. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had known about the quiet record, but I had not known about this. Grandpa had not just built a wall, he had buried a landmine in the garden. Prynne reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a ledger. It was different from the leather notebook. This one was a standard accounting book. Green and rigid. "We have performed the preliminary audit," Prynne said. He opened the book. "Let us begin with Mr. Grant Woods," Prynne said. He ran his finger down the column. "On February 4th, 4 years ago, a transfer of $40,000 was made from Arthur Woods to Grant Woods." The memo line on the check reads, "Business investment." Prin looked at my father. "Mr. Woods." Was this a gift? Grant licked his lips. He looked terrified. If he said it was a gift, he might be in the clear for the debt. But he knew Grandpa was meticulous about taxes. It was an investment. Grant stammered. "In my consulting firm." "Excellent," Prin said. He produced a tax return. "We have reviewed Mr. Arthur Woods's tax filings. He did not claim a loss or a gain on this investment. He listed it as a receivable, a loan." Prin looked at the judge. "Since Mr. Grant Woods has joined this hostile petition, the trust is now calling that loan, with statutory interest. The estate is seeking repayment of $46,000. My father made a choking sound. Prin did not stop. August 10th, 3 years ago. Prin read, $20,000 to Marilyn Woods. Memo line, roof repair. My mother gasped. "Mrs. Woods?" Prin asked, "Did you repair the roof?" Marilyn looked at Grant. Grant looked at the table. "We used it for other household expenses." My mother whispered, "So it was a personal loan." Prin concluded, added to the ledger. He flipped the page. June, 2 years ago, $15,000 to Sloane Woods. Memo line, car. Sloane jumped up. That was a birthday present. He gave me that money for my BMW. Prin held up a slip of paper. "This is a promissory note, signed by you. Sloane, it states that you would repay the principal within 5 years. You signed it." "I forgot." Sloane stammered. "I thought he tore it up." "He did not." Prin said, "He filed it, and now the trust is enforcing it." The list went on. It was a massacre. Prin detailed vacation money, emergency cash for bills that never existed, credit card payoffs for years. My parents and sister had treated Grandpa like a bottomless bank account. They had taken the money and assumed that because he was old, because he was family, he would never ask for it back. They assumed that his death would wipe the slate clean. They were wrong. His death had calcified the debt. The judge was writing furiously. He looked up at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "your clients came into this court claiming they were the victims of a greedy sister. They claimed the estate was being stolen from them. But according to this audit, they have been draining the estate for a decade." Sterling stood up. He looked defeated. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate calculation of damage control. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice shaking, "in light of this new information, perhaps we can reach a settlement. My clients are willing to withdraw the petition with prejudice. They will walk away. We just ask that the estate waives the repayment of these legacy loans." He was trying to cut a deal. He was trying to stop the bleeding. I looked at the judge. I wondered if he would accept it. It would be easier. It would end the fight today. Judge Holloway looked at Sterling. Then he looked at my parents, who were huddled together like frightened children. Then he looked at me. He saw a woman who had been called a leech. He saw a woman who had been accused of holding her grandfather hostage. Judge Holloway turned back to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice hard as iron, "you do not get to accuse a woman of elder abuse, attempt to defraud a trust, and then ask for a favor when the evidence turns against you." The judge leaned over the bench. "You brought a blowtorch into my courtroom." "Counselor," the judge said, "do not complain about the smoke." The judge slammed his hand down on the file. "The motion to settle is denied. The audit will proceed in full. The trustee is authorized to pursue all outstanding debts owed to the estate by the petitioners. If that means placing liens on their properties or garnishing their wages, so be it." My father put his head in his hands. He realized, finally, the true scope of the disaster. He had come here expecting to walk away with millions. Instead, he was walking away with a debt that would bankrupt him. He had exposed his finances to a forensic examination that would likely reveal years of tax evasion and lies. The judge turned his attention to the final ruling. Regarding Article 9, the no contest clause, the judge stated, "The court finds that Miss Sloane Woods, by filing this petition and by making specific accusations of incompetency and coercion on the record today, has triggered the clause. She is hereby disinherited from the Grant Woods Trust. She holds no interest in the estate. The judge paused. He looked at my parents. Furthermore, by joining the petition and offering perjured testimony to support the invalidation of the trust, Mr. Grant Woods and Mrs. Marilyn Woods are also found to be in violation of the clause. Any residual bequests left to them, if there were any remaining after their debts are deducted, are forfeited. It was a clean sweep. Sloane was sobbing quietly. My mother was staring at the wall, catatonic. My father was looking at me. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and confusion. He looked at me like he had never seen me before. He was looking for the daughter he could manipulate. He was looking for the girl who paid the bills and apologized for existing. She wasn't there. I looked at my watch. It was 10:50. I realized then why I had been checking the time. I wasn't waiting for the hearing to end. I wasn't waiting for the money. I had been waiting for the moment when I could stop protecting them. For 36 years, I had been the buffer. I had been the one who softened the blows. I paid the bills so they wouldn't face the creditors. I hid the truth so they wouldn't face the shame. I absorbed Grandpa's disappointment so they wouldn't face his anger. I had been the gatekeeper, but I hadn't been keeping them out. I had been keeping the consequences out. Grandpa knew that. He knew that as long as I was trying to save them, they would never stop feeding on me. So he took the job away from me. He created a mechanism that forced me to step aside. He told me not to open the gate, and today, I finally understood why. The gatekeeper wasn't mercy. It was consequence, and when Mr. Prynne opened that briefcase, he didn't just release the truth. He released the years of accumulated consequences that I had been holding back. I looked at my father and I felt nothing, no guilt, no obligation, no need to fix it. The debt was settled. The judge gathered his papers. This court stands adjourned. Judge Holloway said, Mr. Prynne, you may proceed with the asset transfer and the debt collection. All rise. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my purse. Sloane lunged across the divide. She didn't touch me. The bailiff stepped in too fast, but she screamed one last time. You knew, she shrieked. You knew this would happen. Why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you stop us? I looked at her. I looked at the ruin of her face, the ruin of her life. I did warn you, I said calmly. I walked past her, toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room. I told you to wait. I said, not looking back. But you were in a hurry. Judge Holloway did not waste time with a lecture. He was a man of statutes and orders, and he had seen enough. He stacked the files on his bench, aligning the edges with a precision that felt like the closing of a coffin lid. The petition for emergency conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. The judge announced, the phrase with prejudice is a legal term that sounds exactly like what it is. It means the case is dead. It means you cannot fix the typos and file it again next week. It means the court has heard your story, found it to be a waste of judicial resources, and is barring you from ever bringing this specific complaint back to the table. The judge continued. The court affirms the authority of Cedar Ridge Fiduciary Bank as the sole trustee. The assets remain under their purview. As for the petitioners, I am scheduling a sanctions hearing for next Tuesday. Mr. Sterling, you and your clients should be prepared to explain why you should not be held liable for the entirety of the estate's legal defense fees. He banged the gavel one last time. It was a sharp, final sound that echoed in the high ceilings. Case closed. I stood up. My legs felt light, as if gravity had released its hold on me for the first time in 3 decades. I did not look at the defense table. I picked up my purse, turned my back on the people who shared my DNA, and walked down the center aisle. The heavy doors swung open, and I stepped out of the climate-controlled courtroom into the bright, blinding reality of the parking lot. The sun was high and harsh. The air smelled of asphalt and exhaust. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, wood-paneled tomb we had just left, and for a moment, I just breathed, but the silence did not last. Lily. Wait, it was my father's voice. I kept walking toward my car. A sensible sedan parked 3 rows back. I could hear footsteps hurrying behind me, the scuff of dress shoes on pavement. Lily, please, we need to talk. I stopped at my car door. I did not turn around immediately. I took my keys out of my purse. I unlocked the door. Then, slowly, I turned. They were all there. Grant, Marilyn, and Sloane. They looked like refugees from a high society gala that had been bombed. My father's tie was loosened. My mother's makeup was running. Sloane looked frantic, her eyes darting around the parking lot as if searching for a camera crew to witness her tragedy. "We can fix this," Grant said, breathless. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, the universal sign of a man trying to calm a wild animal. "We can fix this, Lily, the judge. He was harsh, but we are still family. We can come to an arrangement." An arrangement, I asked. My voice was level. I was not shouting. I did not feel the need to shout. "Yes," Grant said, stepping closer. "Look, we all said things in there. Emotions were high. But we cannot let the bank take everything. That money belongs to the Woods family. It belongs to us. If we present a united front, we can appeal. We can tell them we settled." He was still running the old script. He truly believed that if he just spoke with enough authority, reality would bend to his will. He thought he could negotiate with a court order. "We can split it," my mother added, her voice trembling. "Lily, honey, think about it. 25% each. That is fair. You deserve your share. We never said you didn't." I looked at her. I thought about the text messages where she called me a thief. I thought about the years of loans she had taken from a dying man. "There is nothing to split." "Mom," I said. The judge triggered the clause. "You are disinherited." "But you can waive it," Grant insisted. "You are the remaining beneficiary. If you tell the trustee you want to share, they have to listen to you. You owe us that much. Lily, after everything we did for you," the words hung in the hot air. "You owe us." It was the same hook they had used for 14 years. The medical bill, the roof, the guilt. They were trying to snag me one last time. They were betting that the daughter who paid the electric bill was still in there, desperate for their approval. I looked at my father, and I realized something that made me almost sad for him. He didn't know me. He had spent 36 years living with a ghost of his own creation. "I don't owe you anything," I said. "The ledger is closed." I turned to open my car door. Sloane lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was pure animal panic. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into the fabric of my suit jacket. She yanked me back. Her face twisted into a snarl of desperation. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't just walk away with my money. I have debts. Lily, I have a lease. You have to fix this." I looked down at her hand on my arm. Then I looked into her eyes. I stepped back, breaking her grip with a sharp, practiced motion I had learned from a security consultant at my firm. Sloane stumbled back. "Don't add assault to your list of bad decisions," I said. My voice was cold enough to freeze the asphalt. "You are already facing sanctions. Do you want to add a restraining order?" Sloane froze. She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see her little sister. She saw the opponent who had just destroyed her in court. She saw the gatekeeper. I got into my car. I closed the door. I locked it. Through the glass, I watched them. My father was shouting at the air. My mother was weeping into her hands. Sloane was standing there, staring at my car, looking like a child who had dropped her ice cream cone in the dirt. I started the engine. I put the car in reverse, and I drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. 3 days later, Arthur Prynne called me. I was in my kitchen, making tea. The house was quiet. The hospital bed was gone. The oxygen tanks were gone. It was just a house now. "Miss Woods," Prynne said. His voice was as dry as ever. "I am calling to confirm that the transfer of control is complete." "Okay," I said. "The liquid assets have been moved into a new account under the trust's name, with you as the sole primary beneficiary." Prynne continued. "The deeds to the properties have been recorded. The total valuation of the liquid portfolio, as of this morning's market open, is $8,420,000. $8 million? It was just a number. It sounded like a phone number. And the petitioners I asked, Mr. Sterling has withdrawn as their counsel, Prince said with a hint of satisfaction, probably because he realized his retainer check was going to bounce. The court issued the sanctions order this morning. Miss Sloane Woods has been ordered to pay $112,000 in legal fees to the estate. I closed my eyes. $112,000. Sloane didn't have $112, and the audit I asked? The audit is finalized, Prince said. We have formally reclassified $340,000 of historical transfers to your parents as demand notes. We have filed liens against their primary residence. If they attempt to sell the house, the trust gets paid first, if they don't sell. We will begin foreclosure proceedings on the debt within 90 days. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was exactly what Grandpa had designed. He hadn't just cut them off. He had ensured they would spend the rest of their lives paying for the sins of the past. There is one more thing, Miss Woods, Prince said. Yes, your grandfather left an envelope in my custody. The instructions were specific. I was only to give it to you after the legal proceedings were concluded, and only if the no contest clause had been triggered. A letter I asked? A package, Prince said. I have sent it via courier. It should be arriving at your door now. The doorbell rang. I walked to the door. I signed for the package. It was a thick brown envelope. I took it into the kitchen. I sat down at the table where I had eaten so many silent meals with Grandpa. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery and a legal document. I picked up the note first. It was in Grandpa's handwriting. But it was strong, written on a good day. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, it means they did exactly what I feared they would do. It means they dragged you through the mud. It means they tried to break the lock. I am sorry you had to go through that fight, but I knew you could win it. You were always the strong one. Even when you thought you were the invisible one, the money is yours. You earned it 1,000 times over, but I know you. Lily, I know your heart, and I know that even after everything they have done, part of you will feel guilty. Part of you will wonder if you should have been nicer. So, I am leaving you one last instruction, not about the money, but about the gate. Attached is a waiver of enforcement. It is a document I had Mr. Prin draft. If you sign it, it grants the trustee permission to issue a small, monthly compassionate stipend to your parents and sister. It overrides the disinheritance just enough to keep them from ruin. But here's the condition. The trust forbids me from giving it to them. Only you can give it to them. You have the power. If you feel they have earned your mercy, sign it. If you feel they have not changed, destroy it. The choice is yours. You are the gatekeeper now. Love, Grandpa. I put the note down. I picked up the legal document. Waiver of enforcement regarding Article 9 disinheritance. It was a mercy clause. It was Grandpa giving me the ultimate authority. He knew that for my entire life. My parents had held the power. They held the approval. They held the love hostage. They made me dance for scraps. Now, the dynamic was reversed. I held their survival in my hand. I could sign this paper and save them. I could be the bigger person. I could prove that I was better than them. I stared at the signature line. I thought about the hospital bill they lied about. I thought about the roof money they stole. I thought about Sloane calling me the help. I thought about the way my father looked at me in the parking lot, not with love, but with calculation. If I signed this, nothing would change. They would take the money. They would say they deserved it. They would tell their friends that they won a settlement. They would never learn. They would never respect me. They would just see me as the useful idiot who opened the door one last time. Mercy without change is just enabling. And I was done enabling. I stood up. I walked to the shredder in the corner of the office, the same shredder I had used to destroy junk mail for 3 years. I fed the document into the slot. The machine whirred. The blades chewed through the heavy paper. Grind, grind, grind. It took 10 seconds. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel sad. I felt clean. I walked back to the table and picked up my phone. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to Grant Woods. I hit edit. I scrolled down to the bottom. I hit delete contact. I scrolled to Marilyn Woods. Delete contact. I scrolled to Sloane. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I remembered when we were little, before the money ruined everything. But then I remembered her hand on my arm in the parking lot. I remembered the hate in her eyes. Delete contact. They weren't blocked. I wasn't hiding from them. If they called, the phone would ring. But the names wouldn't appear. They would just be numbers, unknown numbers, strangers trying to sell me something I didn't want to buy. I put the phone down on the table. The house was silent. But it wasn't empty. It was full of peace. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. The gate was closed. The lock was secure. Grandpa was right. You don't open the gate for people who only love the lock. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come in. I was just happy to be home. The account is settled. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you found some satisfaction in seeing the truth finally come to light. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe just relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories and connecting with you all. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Kate Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and give the video a hype to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and see you in the next one.